I never wanted to be the guy who had to teach an entire neighborhood a lesson. I never wanted revenge or drama or lawsuits. All I ever wanted was peace. A quiet lake. The sound of water tapping against the dock. A cabin where I could wake up to fog curling off the surface, drink my coffee and forget the world existed. That lake had been mine for 20 years. My father built the dam back when this valley was nothing but wild forest and fishing trails. He told me, "Son, this place isn't just land. It's legacy." And I believed him. I took care of it like it was a living thing. But peace doesn't last long when the HOA moves in. They called themselves Silver Pines Lakeside Community Association. Sounds pretty enough, right? The kind of name that shows up on glossy brochures promising nature, tranquility, and modern amenities. Except they built that so-called community right up to my property line without even asking who owned the lake feeding their so-called paradise. At first, I didn't mind. A few families moved in. Kids laughed by the water. I thought maybe it would be nice having neighbors who respected the land. But the moment they formed that HOA board, everything changed. Suddenly I was getting letters. "Dear Mr. Walker, according to our environmental guidelines, your dock is not approved for use by HOA residents." Or "We've received reports that your dam obstructs water flow for our community's scenic ponds." My dam. My lake. My land. I tried reasoning with them. I went to one of their meetings in that fancy glass clubhouse they built. They all sat around in their khaki shorts and matching polos, talking about property value and water aesthetics. Their president, a woman named Deborah Milton, smiled like she owned the world and said, "You understand, Mr. Walker, this lake benefits everyone now. It would only be fair if we discussed shared management." Shared management. That's HOA language for "we take it, you pay for it." I told them no. Simple as that. My dam was registered under my father's name long before their subdivision existed. My lake was fed by private creeks that ran through my property. The state recognized it as privately maintained. Deborah just smiled again, that fake, brittle smile of someone who wasn't used to hearing no. She said, "We'll see about that." And oh, they did see about it. A few months later, I woke up to the sound of trucks. I looked down from my porch and saw construction crews lining the shore. Heavy machinery. Survey markers. Wooden frames. They were building cabins. Dozens of them. I drove down and demanded to know what they thought they were doing. The site manager shrugged and told me, "We got clearance from the HOA. They're expanding the resort section." Resort section? I asked. He pointed at the sign they'd planted in the dirt. Silver Pines Lakeside Vacation Retreat. 139 luxury cabins coming soon. That was the day I realized they weren't neighbors anymore. They were invaders. I called my lawyer. He told me it would take months, maybe years, to fight something like this in court. The HOA had powerful backers and slick legal tricks. They claimed the water level of my lake was publicly beneficial, and that they had temporary development rights. My dam was being reviewed for safety compliance, which meant they were trying to take my land through red tape and paperwork. While I fought, they built. Every week, more cabins went up. Tour buses started showing up. They even installed docks and rented out boats, on my water. My water. They sold lake access passes online. Tourists came to fish and swim, leaving trash and beer cans along the shore. I found one family grilling right on my private dock like it was a public park. When I told them to leave, they laughed and said, "We paid the HOA for a cabin, man. Chill out." I could feel something in me breaking. For months, I tried every legal route. Letters, protests, complaints. Nothing worked. The HOA ignored me completely. They even built a small road that cut right through the wooded trail leading to my dam. I knew what they were doing. They wanted control. They wanted to pressure me into selling. But they underestimated one thing. That dam wasn't just concrete and steel. It was built with old engineering, yes, but my father designed it with manual floodgates. I was the only one who knew how to operate them. No one could open or close those gates without my key. And that key sat on my nightstand every night, heavy and cold, like a reminder of everything my father built, and everything they were destroying. Then came the final insult. One afternoon, I got a notice in the mail, stamped with the HOA seal. Read. Effective immediately, the Silver Pines Lakeside Association hereby claims shared ownership of Walker Lake, as outlined in Section 47 of the Environmental Development Ordinance. You are ordered to cease any private operations, including dam maintenance, pending community evaluation. They were taking my lake. Officially. That night, I sat by the water until dawn. The cabin's lights reflected off the surface like cheap stars. I watched tourists laugh around fire pits. I watched the board members drink champagne on their brand new docks. My father's words echoed in my head. This place isn't just land. It's legacy. By morning I made my decision. If they wanted my lake they could have it, every drop of it. I waited for the perfect storm. 3 days of heavy rain filled the reservoir to the brim. The clouds hung low, heavy, almost like nature itself was holding its breath. I checked the dam early that morning. The gates creaked, old but solid. The pressure gauge needle trembled near the red zone. It was dangerous, but I wasn't afraid. That evening I drove my truck down to the base road. Rain was coming down in sheets, turning the dirt into slick mud. Thunder rolled across the valley like a drum. I parked by the maintenance hut, grabbed the key and walked to the lever. My heart was steady. They built 139 vacation cabins without permission. They filled my lake with garbage, tourists and greed. They drained the soul out of what my father left me. And now I was about to return it all to nature. I turned the wheel slowly. The old metal groaned as the gate locks released. The roar that followed wasn't water, it was fury. Pure, unstoppable power. The flood tore through the valley, racing toward the lake's edge. The surface foamed white, and within minutes the water started to drop. Cabins near the shoreline began to tilt. I could hear the cracking of wooden stilts from miles away. The tourists ran for cover. The HOA members tried to direct people uphill, shouting orders, but it was useless. Nature doesn't negotiate. I stood in the rain watching the lake drain back into the river that once carved this land. By dawn, the valley was quiet again. The water was gone. All that remained were broken docks, half-flooded cabins, and silence. When the authorities came, they found me sitting by the dam, sipping coffee like it was any other morning. They asked what happened. I told them the truth. The storm overloaded the gates. I did what I could. Technically, I wasn't lying. The HOA tried to sue me, of course. But after investigations, it turned out they had built illegally on private property without proper environmental clearance. The insurance companies refused to cover the damage. The bank foreclosed on half their lots. Silver Pines collapsed within months. As for me, I rebuilt the dam. Reinforced it. Planted trees where their cabins once stood. The lake returned, calmer, cleaner, quieter. Just like before. Sometimes at sunset I still walk down to the shore. I can see bits of wood buried in the silt, what's left of those cabins. And when the wind moves across the water, it almost sounds like laughter. Not the cruel kind they used to throw my way, but peaceful. Like the lake's finally free again. Because in the end I didn't destroy anything. I just let nature take back what was hers. After the flood, Silver Pines looked like something out of a ghost story. What was once a shiny new resort community had turned into a wasteland of shattered wood, sunken decks, and torn fences. The air smelled like mud and defeat. For the first time in months, I could walk along my shoreline without hearing music or boat engines or the shrieking of weekend tourists. The water level had returned to normal, calm and clear. The land was quiet again, but I knew that peace wouldn't last forever. The HOA wasn't gone. Not yet. 3 days after the flood, a convoy of black SUVs rolled down the dirt road. I watched from my porch as they pulled up in front of my property. Out stepped a small army of suits, lawyers, insurance adjusters, government agents, and in the middle of it all, Deborah Milton. Even soaked from the rain and wearing a grim expression, she carried that same arrogance. The kind that said she still thought she could win. She didn't knock. She just walked straight up to my porch, heels clicking against the wood. "You think this is over, Mr. Walker?" she said. I didn't answer. I just kept sipping my coffee. She gestured toward the valley. "You caused millions in damages. You think you can just sit up here and watch it all wash away?" I set the mug down. "You built on private land without permission. You flooded your own investments." She folded her arms. "Our engineers say your dam wasn't properly maintained. The gates failed under pressure. That's negligence." "Funny," I said. "Because those gates worked exactly as they were supposed to." Her jaw tightened. "You think this is a game? You think you can hide behind your old man's paperwork? But this isn't the 1980s anymore, Mr. Walker. Property rights evolve." "Not mine," I told her. She turned to one of the men beside her. "Get every record, every deed, every inspection report. We're taking this to court." Then she looked back at me with that brittle smile again. "You'll be lucky if you still have a house by the time we're done." They left in a storm of engines and mud, and I just stood there watching the dust rise behind them. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of fighting people who saw land as a number on a spreadsheet. Tired of defending something sacred to people who only spoke the language of profit. Weeks passed. The state came to inspect the dam. I walked them through every mechanism, every maintenance log, every safety upgrade I'd done over the years. They took photos, made notes, and left without saying much. When the final report came in, it said exactly what I knew it would: no negligence found. The dam was structurally sound. The water release was within expected safety parameters given the rainfall. In other words, an act of nature. The HOA's insurance companies weren't so lucky. When they learned the cabins were built without approved zoning, they dropped coverage entirely. No payouts. No compensation. Just debts and lawsuits piling up. By the end of that month, the Silver Pines Association was bleeding money. Several board members quit. Homeowners started abandoning their half-built lots. But Deborah stayed. She was a fighter, I'll give her that. She kept holding emergency meetings, trying to rally what was left of the community. She sent me letters, some threatening, some desperate. One of them read, "You've destroyed livelihoods, families, investments. If you have any conscience, you'll help rebuild." Conscience. That word stung for a moment. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. I hadn't just destroyed a development, I'd wrecked people's dreams. Some of those cabins were owned by retirees who didn't know the HOA had no rights to the land. Some were young couples trying to start something new. They didn't deserve what happened. So I drove down one morning just to see it all for myself. The air was still damp from the recent storms. The lake had refilled, smaller but healthier. Wildflowers had already started sprouting through the mud where cabins once stood. Nature was healing faster than people. A few construction workers were salvaging what they could: broken beams, twisted metal, personal belongings left behind. I recognized one of the men. He was a local carpenter named Elias. We'd fished together a few times years ago. When he saw me, he just shook his head. "Hell of a mess, huh?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "It didn't have to be like this." He shrugged. "Deborah wouldn't listen. We told her to check the permits. She said the HOA had it under control." "Where is she?" I asked. He pointed toward the big clubhouse at the end of the road. Half the roof was caved in, windows shattered, but the office inside still stood. When I walked in, she was sitting behind her desk surrounded by stacks of papers. The power was out, but she had a flashlight clamped to a chair, its beam bouncing off her glasses. She looked up as I stepped inside. "Come to gloat?" she asked. "No," I said. "To talk." She laughed bitterly. "Talk? Sure. That's what we should have done months ago. Before you turned my community into a swamp." "It was never your community," I told her. "You built on my lake without asking. You tried to take what didn't belong to you." She slammed her pen down. "You're so self-righteous. Do you even understand how much this project was worth? How many people invested their savings here? You could have partnered with us. You could have made millions." I stepped closer, my voice low. "Some things aren't for sale." She leaned back, eyes cold. "Then you can drown in your principles." I almost walked out. But then she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You think this is over, but I've already filed a motion to have your dam condemned. You might have fooled the inspectors, but I've got state lawyers reviewing environmental damage. They'll find something. And when they do, that lake will be drained for good." That was her plan, to destroy it out of spite. If she couldn't have it, no one could. That night, I sat on my porch again, staring at the dark line of trees around the water. I realized Deborah wasn't going to stop until there was nothing left. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about power. About her pride. So I decided to give her one last lesson in humility. I started gathering everything my father had ever written about the dam: blueprints, water studies, old photos, letters from state engineers who had helped him design it. He was meticulous. Every record was dated, every modification documented. And more importantly, the dam had one unique legal safeguard. My father had registered it not just as private property, but as a heritage water control system. That meant it was protected under state preservation law. I took all those documents to the county office myself. The clerk flipped through them and raised her eyebrows. "You realize this changes everything," she said. "If this designation still stands, no one, not even the HOA, can modify or decommission it without your consent." "Good," I said. "Make it official." Within a week, the paperwork went through. My dam was legally untouchable. Then I did something that even surprised me. I started reaching out to the people who had lost cabins. The regular folks, not the board members. The ones who'd been misled. I offered to help them relocate, even let a few families camp on my land while they figured things out. I told them the truth, that they'd been scammed by the HOA, that Deborah had forged or twisted the permits to make it look legitimate. Word spread fast. The homeowners turned on her. Lawsuits started piling up, not against me but against the HOA itself. The same people who once praised her leadership were now demanding she repay them for the mess she created. One evening I saw her again. She came to my property alone, her car kicking up dust as she parked near the gate. I could tell she hadn't slept in days. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "They're blaming me for everything," she said. "You led them," I replied. "You promised them something that wasn't yours to give." She looked out at the water, now still and shining under the moonlight. "I just wanted to build something beautiful," she whispered. "You did," I said quietly. "Then you tried to own it." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned and walked back to her car. I never saw her again. Months passed. The cabins rotted into the soil. The grass grew tall where the roads once ran. The animals came back: deer, herons, even a family of beavers near the north bank. The land was reclaiming itself piece by piece. But sometimes when I looked at the empty valley I thought about Deborah. About how greed blinds people to the beauty already around them. She wasn't the first to learn that lesson, and she won't be the last. A year later I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo of the lake, taken from across the ridge. Scrawled on the back were 3 words: "You were right." I never knew if it came from her. But I like to think it did. Now when I sit by the water the air is still. The lake reflects the sky just like it used to. My father's old dam hums quietly in the distance, steady as ever. Sometimes people pass by and ask about the ruins in the woods. I just smile and say, that's what happens when people forget who the land really belongs to. And when the wind shifts and the water ripples against the dock, it almost sounds like the earth laughing, soft and patient, reminding me that no one ever truly owns nature. We're just guests for a while. For a while, it felt like peace had finally come back to me. The lake was calm again, the trees green and thick along the hills, the air cleaner than it had been in years. I spent my mornings on the dock with a cup of black coffee, watching the mist roll across the water like a slow tide of memory. I'd thought that chapter of my life was over, that I'd buried the chaos along with the last of the broken cabins. But peace never lasts forever. 2 years after the flood it started again, this time quieter, more careful. I noticed survey flags one morning along the northern ridge, small orange markers staked into the ground near the treeline. At first I figured it was just some state inspection, maybe forestry work. But then I saw the signs. Riverbend Development Company. A new name. Same greed. I called the county office to ask what was going on. The clerk hesitated before answering. "Preliminary environmental assessments," she said. "Private investment groups submitted a proposal to build eco-cabins near the lake." Eco-cabins. I almost laughed. It was the same con wrapped in a prettier word. That evening I drove out to where the surveyors were working. 2 trucks were parked by the road. A man in a bright vest was standing over a map, clipboard in hand. I stepped out of my truck and asked him what company he worked for. He introduced himself as Mark Bennett, project manager for Riverbend. "We're just running environmental impact tests," he said with a polite smile. "All legal and above board." "On whose land?" I asked. He checked his papers. "According to our records, this ridge is under pending development rights owned by the Silver Pines Recovery Trust." That name stopped me cold. "The HOA?" He shrugged. "Well, technically it's what's left of it. They sold the remaining assets to Riverbend 2 years ago. Some investors are trying to rebuild under new management." I took a long breath, trying to keep my temper steady. "This land's protected. You build anything here and you'll be violating heritage law." He gave me that same condescending smile I'd seen on too many faces before. "We've got lawyers for that, sir. If there's an issue, we'll handle it." I drove home that night with a feeling I hadn't had in years, a tightness in my chest, the same anger that had burned the first time I saw those cabins rise out of my lake. I thought I was done fighting. I thought I could finally just live. But the world doesn't leave you alone when it smells profit. The next few weeks were full of noise again. Trucks, drills, metal stakes. The same invasion, just with newer logos and shinier equipment. The company didn't touch the lake directly this time. They were smarter. They stayed just outside my legal boundary, but I knew what they were planning. Step 1: build eco-trails. Step 2: claim the shoreline as shared access. Step 3: sell the view and drain the soul. I tried reason first. I met with their lawyer downtown, a young guy in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never had dirt under his fingernails. I showed him the heritage documents, the dam registry, the court rulings that followed the HOA collapse. He nodded politely through all of it and said, "We'll review these with our legal team." A week later bulldozers showed up anyway. They started clearing trees on the east bank, cutting into the slope that fed runoff into my lake. I called the environmental board, filed complaints, even showed them photos. They said they'd send someone to investigate. No one came. That's when I realized the developers had friends in high places. Money moves faster than justice. But I had something they didn't. History. I went through my father's old journals again. He'd written everything: the construction logs, soil compositions, flood maps. I found one particular entry dated 1978. It mentioned underground aquifers feeding into the dam's lower channels, and how destabilizing the ridge above them could cause collapses or sinkholes. The developers had no idea they were cutting into fragile ground. I knew then that if I couldn't stop them through law, nature would do it for me. I drove out to their site again. Mark Bennett was there, overseeing the work. I told him about the ridge instability, warned him about the underground veins. He smiled like I was an old fool trying to scare him off. "We've got modern tech, sir," he said. "We'll be fine." I just nodded and left. 3 days later the storm came. It rolled over the valley in thick black clouds that swallowed the sun. The air smelled like electricity. The first rumble of thunder hit like cannon fire. By nightfall, the rain came down hard enough to blur the world into gray. I checked the dam gauges. The water levels were steady, but the runoff from the ridge was fierce. I could see muddy streams pouring down from where Riverbend had stripped the soil bare. By morning the ridge gave way. I woke to the sound of a roar that shook the windows. The east slope collapsed in a wave of mud and broken trees, swallowing the new construction site whole. Trucks, trailers, half-built structures, all gone in seconds. Nature had spoken again. When the rain cleared, I drove out to see the damage. It was worse than I imagined. The ridge had opened like a wound, exposing deep cracks filled with rushing brown water. One of the engineers stood near the wreckage, pale as a ghost. He looked at me with wide eyes and said, "It's like the ground just fell apart." I didn't say anything. I just looked at what was left of their project and thought, maybe now they'll understand. But they didn't. Within days the media showed up. News crews, drones, interviews. They called it a landslide tragedy. Riverbend tried to spin the story as a natural disaster that no one could have predicted. Then they tried to blame me. Said my dam had affected groundwater stability. Said my property's old design had contributed to soil weakening. Same story. Different names. So I called a press conference. They held it at the county hall. Reporters lined the steps with cameras flashing. I walked up in my work boots and flannel shirt, carrying a stack of documents thicker than any lawyer's briefcase. When the questions started flying, I spoke slowly, clearly, letting each word hit the air. "I warned them," I said. "They built on unstable ground. They ignored the preservation laws. My family's dam has held this lake for 50 years without a single incident. The only disaster here is greed." Then I held up my father's old blueprints. "This dam was built to protect this valley, not profit from it. Nature doesn't belong to investors." That video went viral. For the first time, the world saw me not as the stubborn old landowner the HOA painted me as, but as the man standing between nature and exploitation. The state launched a new investigation. Turns out Riverbend had falsified several environmental safety reports. Permits were pulled. Funding dried up. The project collapsed before it even began. Mark Bennett disappeared from the picture after that. Some said he quit, others said he was fired. As for the investors, they moved on, looking for their next piece of land to ruin somewhere else. But I stayed. I stayed because this place wasn't something you leave behind. Every stone, every tree, every ripple on that lake carried my family's fingerprints. When I walked along the dam at sunset, I could still hear my father's voice teaching me how to read the water, how to listen for changes in its rhythm. He used to say, "If you respect nature, it'll protect you. But if you use it, it'll find a way to take itself back." He was right. It always does. One evening, months after the dust had settled, I found a letter nailed to my gate. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting looked familiar. It said, "You keep winning because you don't fight the land. You listen." I don't know who sent it. Maybe an old worker from Riverbend. Maybe Deborah if she was still out there somewhere. Either way, it felt like closure. Now the lake is quieter than ever. The grass has grown over the scars where the cabins once stood. Fish have returned in numbers I haven't seen since childhood. Sometimes local kids come by to swim and I let them. I tell them stories about the dam, about how my father built it with his own hands. They listen with wide eyes and I can see hope in them, the kind that comes from learning that not everything has to be bought or built over. At night, when the moonlight hits the water, it glows silver, almost like it's alive. The dam hums with a low steady rhythm, and the trees whisper in the wind. I sit there, alone but content, knowing that every person who tried to own this place has failed. The lake belongs to no one but itself. People sometimes ask me why I never sold it, why I keep fighting every time someone comes knocking with big promises and bigger money. I tell them the truth. Because this land doesn't need saving, it just needs someone stubborn enough to stand still while the rest of the world forgets what matters. I've learned that revenge isn't about destruction. It's about balance. What I did wasn't vengeance, it was restoration. The HOA Riverbend, all of them, they thought they could shape nature into a product. But nature always remembers its shape. When I look at the dam, I see more than concrete. I see legacy. I see defiance. I see proof that sometimes doing nothing, just standing your ground, is the most powerful act of all. And if someday another company comes with their fancy maps and fake smiles, I'll be right here. The lake will be here too. Waiting. Watching. Because you can build 100 cabins, pour $1 million, file all the papers you want. But in the end, when the rain falls and the ground shakes, nature doesn't care about contracts. Nature remembers who listens. And I always have. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me next time for another story where justice comes full circle.